seems to be a run on the name of Jeff for speakers this week. So I too collected two Jeffs there, Mike. Um, I think Jeff Kent, could we just start the Q&A with you? Um, Perhaps with you give us, please give us your perspectives of sustainability and ESG in general at P&G, and then perhaps you can reflect on some of the comments you heard today.
Yeah, so thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here to talk on the behalf of Procter & Gamble. Just so you know, I work in our Smart Platforms group, which deals with bringing intelligence to life across our manufacturing supply chain operations, and I partner daily with our sustainability efforts that are being led across the company, but particularly out of Germany and Kronberg, where we're coming up with equipment, processes, technologies to serve three of our most important goals. You know, Procter & Gamble is about touching lives of people, improving lives every day. That was why I joined the company. I think at times in my career I wondered, were we committed to that, particularly on sustainability? As you might know, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And you know that our products have a lot of plastics. We use a lot of energy. We consume a lot of water around the world. And it's a proud moment to see the company with our 2030 and 2040 objectives really taking a really strong position in the world, strong position in our industries to lead those differences. And I'll talk a bit about that. So for me, the response, a lot of talk about mobility, right? And we too have a lot of transportation. You know, our supply chain is very transportation dependent. Much of the talk for the last few years is, can you get enough transportation to move your products through the supply chain? And everybody has that challenge. Well, in addition, when we put that together with sustainability, much of our fleet activity in our own operations is moving to consider electric vehicles and movement within the warehousing, within the actual field where things need to move and in between our operations. So we too are paying close attention to the ecosystems that we're responsible for. You know, we also, and I'd love to talk to some of you about how our operations and our sites are moving to our employees having more access to electric charging stations, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, what's great for P&G is this discussion always is about profitability and money, but it's become about the other vectors that Jim, you just spoke about, right? We are, as I said, about improving lives of people every day. We have to be doing that when it comes to climate. So we have new net zero greenhouse emissions promises that are well underway at our sites. We have water promises that allow us to reduce in-home use of water and in water use in our operations. There's some really exciting work on the 50-liter home, 50 liters a day for a home and its family to use only 50 liters. It sounds like it should be able to be done, but it's a very important habit changing. You see some of our commercials, whether you like them or not, about going to cold wash, right? And all of us learning different habits in our home use. And then plastics, right? That's the one that I would tell you in my career, I always had a little bit of a twitch about. You know, we produce a lot of products that are put in plastic packaging. It appeared most of my career they were single use, and you know, what's the cycle of that plastic? Well, we've made major commitments, major influence. So David Taylor, our previous CEO, now to John Moeller, is leading the charge in the industry to move to 100% recycled plastics and no plastics to be going to waste. So I'm very proud of that. I think, you know, I've been with Procter & Gamble almost 25 years. It did bother me for many, many years, right? That are we part of the problem or part of the solution? And I'm proud to say that we're moving towards that in many, many areas. So I talked climate, water, plastics, and then we have forestry, right? Some of you wanted to make sure that you had vaccinations, and Pfizer and I talked this morning. Well, I know you also wanted certain paper products, right, to be able to live a comfortable life. We certainly realize that not only do we want to supply those and have those available, we want to do it in a sustainable way. So our commitment to forestry and making sure that that is a cycle of renewable planting of trees and protecting certain environmental basins, protecting certain environments, as well as doing it with responsible human labor. All these things are things that are on our website, and I could have done a nice presentation, but I think the last point is that if we want this to be about the economic viability, it's about, will the consumers really expect that from us? Will they buy from us? Will they stay loyal to us? Will they be proud of us? And that's clearly happening. I was just discussing our organization in Germany being at ground zero of what a consumer expects whether it's on water or plastics or sustainable products. And we're using that as a microcosm to be good at what we need to do in Germany and then bring it to all the other operations and other consumers around the world. So it's a proud moment in my mind for Procter & Gamble, from the CEO to the product supply officer to everyone in our organizations, engineering, R&D, all working together against this objective. And I would say that maybe it wasn't true. We were doing it in silos maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, but now it's a consolidated effort. And like I said, we're either part of the problem or part of the solution. In a big company like Procter & Gamble, who produce on such scale and puts so many products out there in the world, billions a day, we have to be part of the solution, and we need to be proud of what we're contributing. So, and then economically, obviously it's about maintaining loyalty of consumers, increasing the top line and bottom line with all these activities. And both of those equations are getting more and more emphatic. Obviously the consumer loyalty drives NOS, or outside sales, but you can see that our operating margins, our resiliency, our ability to mitigate our risks have become the bigger discussion. COVID reminded us that even if we have the best supply chains, we're still at risk. So we're at risk of what materials we can get. We're at risk of what government regulations. We're at risk at many, many environmental factors. And again, we're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And I feel like we're making great strides. And I, as a smart platforms leader, know that I have to enable these technologies with the intelligence, the data, the transparency. And maybe the last statement I'll make is on plastics, right? If we're ever going to promise 100% recyclable plastics and the consumption of the right raw materials, we have to have the true, transparent truth. And that's going to come through the right data models, from the feedstocks to the raw material suppliers, to the production, to the finished product, to the transportation. And that's only going to happen with data models and data domains that are available, secure, through blockchain and other data modeling and other systems. And that's part of my job, to work with these systems. So proud moment to listen to all the courageous work that's going on with BEEP and government and charging, and we'll do our part to hopefully adopt them as quickly as possible with you. Okay?
Thanks, Jeff. I neglected to mention that we do have a Slido poll, and I would urge everyone to just take a picture of that and pop open the link and take the poll. It's not a simple one-question poll. What it really is an attempt at a small ESG rating system for us here in this room. So each of those 5 groups of human factors that we saw are in each question, and we ask you to rate them by most important to least important. You can type in a 1 or a 2 or a 3 on the ones you think are most important, and then you could slide them up and down in each question. So we'd really like to see the results of that, and it sort of our mock ESG poll that we're doing today. But without further ado, last but certainly not least is Jeff Benavides, Head of Sustainability for Orange County. Orange County surrounds Orlando. I believe there are 8,000 or so employees and 1.5 million citizen customers that reside there. So go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hello. Thanks, Jim. So I just wanted to piggyback on a couple of things for some context. Thank you and welcome to Orange County in Orlando here. We do have 1.5 million visitors, but obviously you all are in the smart infrastructure, smart cities, technology deployment. We're a huge customer or a huge potential customer for you all. So I encourage you to do business with Orange County. Bring us the technology, bring us some innovation. Our Mayor Demings hired this position. It was a brand new position for sustainability and resilience, as well as an emerging technology and innovation officer at the same time when he took office. So the priorities for smart tech are, here and ready, and we're ready to do business through a variety of different ways. Even though historically Orange County's been a little far behind the city of Orlando and some of our more progressive cities, but we are at the table. I'll start by saying just, lessons learned, since everyone kind of gave some lessons learned. From my experience in this position, I really had to take a step back and say, okay, I came from the private sector. How do I measure ESG? How do I measure sustainability performance? How do I benchmark Orange County's operations as well as our community as a whole against other communities? So I had to look through a variety of different ways of how we measure these sustainability and resilience priorities across the nation. And then, of course, private sector, which is far more integral and far more sophisticated when it comes to measurement and reporting. As Julia mentioned on that list of agencies and reporting agencies, we don't have that type of stuff for local governments, unfortunately. And there's not those regulated items as far as here, definitely in our state. And in fact, in the federal government, we don't have those types of rating scorecards collectively. So I looked to actually the U.S. Green Building Council. I looked at the Lead for Cities and Communities rating index, which had at the time just begun. And we were part of and selected for a cohort, and we actually have been able to score gold in that rating system, and super proud of that work, really using that as a benchmark from county to county, city to city across the country. And the other item that we have been closely monitoring, and my colleague Julia mentioned a little bit about the rating agencies. The rating agencies like the big three, Fitch and Moody's, et cetera. And we really rely on those rating agencies as local government for our bonds. Every time we're doing infrastructure bonds, whether it's wastewater treatment plants, transportation networks, or anything like that, we really rely on our rating with those rating agencies. And they're now just getting into the market of rating local governments with some of the similar ESG metrics that the private sector are going. It's very, frankly, it's the wild, wild west. But it makes sense because obviously, if we can't measure risk of a city or a county government, especially for our coastal communities or some of the communities that are at the front lines of infrastructure degradation over time, and especially with the climate risks that we have upon us, how can we seek those bonds for infrastructure projects if they're not going to be there in 20, 30 years? So it's a measurement game at this point. Fortunately, here in our region, we've really come together with a bunch of our local governments in our Regional Resilience Collaborative to really measure these metrics, and really so that we can at least start working together across counties in our 8-county region here in Central Florida, and really start measuring some of these outcomes moving forward. So super interesting work that is going on, and really trying to hone in and localize the sustainable development goals at the international level, and then more so at the local level. So that kind of gives some landscape on how we interpret ESG for local governments.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Now that everyone has made their presentations and had a chance to speak, it's question and answer time. So we do have canned questions, but we would prefer to take questions from the audience or from the panel who could ask questions of each other. So do we have any questions from the audience? Go.
Hang on.
Peter, right here.
Well, there's tens of
No, but
people in here.
We need it. We're recording.
I don't want you to be out of a job. Thanks. Charlie Nigoy from LibraStream. Thanks for the insight, by the way. The thing that's been most surprising to me during this week is that sustainability has been such a big deal, right? I was surprised at some of the results, the poll that ARC shared yesterday. I guess question for Jeff Kent, really. You touched on a little bit of this, that sustainability and ESG it's the right thing to do, and it sounds like the sort of bottom line benefit is that consumers will make a deliberate choice to say, if I have a choice, I'm gonna buy something that's more sustainable. Are you able to push that deeper into your supply chain? When we think about constrained supply chain, we think about inflation. When you're going upstream, or your peer companies or other industries are going upstream, is that same sentiment being pushed all the way back? In other words, are you guys choosing suppliers that are doing sustainable things versus somebody else, even if it costs more?
Yes, I think it's an all-in proposition, right? I think sustainability, I think, as I said, maybe was a nice thing to do 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but what we learned in COVID is resilience, and a strong supply chain resiliently is probably the bigger discussion in sustainability. Is it's the brother or sister, right? I mean, to me, picking suppliers, they have to have this level of maturity, right? Maturity in how they're operating, how they're sustainably operating, and how well they're operating on transparency and traceability of that whole operation. And as a result, they should be accountable to their sustainability goals, the transparency of data and how they operate, and then how that turns into resiliency and quality in our supply chain. So I don't think it's any one metric anymore. I think it's an equally participating metric of ESG and how we evaluate our partners, evaluate our supply chain. And in the end, that makes us more resilient, right? I think at least on the supply chain, because it's still difficult in absolute monetary terms to reach that ROI, right? I think that's maybe the elephant in the room that you're asking about. I think it's getting easier. The cost of energy, the cost of performance is starting to tip a little more in the equation of ESG. But I think we've looked at it much more holistically now, instead of it just being about productivity and total delivered cost and why you do energy sustainability. It's the top line benefit to what the consumers expect, particularly in many of the regions and governments. Then we have to operate our supply chain more holistically resilient, and ESG concerns are right at the center of resiliency, right? And then, finally, we just need to be a more contributing country or company, because if you know anything about P&G and big companies, we actually create living ecosystems around our plants, around our operations, right? And so we have a huge obligation to be doing that to improve not only the lives of consumers, but improve the lives of our employees and the communities that they work in. Particularly, if you look at where all our manufacturing sites, they're all in rural areas, or they're in areas where we need to be contributing to the community in their own ESG efforts. So I would answer that question. It's an all-in proposition, but it still centers on resiliency in the supply chain, and then the other areas of benefiting the top line benefits to our consumers. So I think if you look at it together, it becomes less of a pure ROI discussion and more of a strategic imperative that also has resiliency and ROI considerations. I think that's the best and only way to get out of that pure ROI debate.
Just wanted to piggyback real quick on that. I would also challenge you to ask that same question of local governments and what local government's role is in that supply chain determination. Because, we have a $5.6 billion budget. That's a big budget, and we're the 5th largest county in Florida, so we're just number 5 in that. So the others have far more money that they expend on products and services. So I urge you to think about that at the local level. And it's funny, I gave a presentation to our internal engineers the other day when a group of consultants that we work with, and they're like, Jeff, have you quantified the cost of transitioning to 100% clean renewable energy for county operations? And I kind of said it in a very negative way. And I said, have you figured out the cost of why we haven't, like the cost of not doing it? That's the way that I like to think about it instead. And again, that responsibility to public health and public good, it's super interesting when you think about, taxpayers. That's how he was kind of framing the question, the impact to taxpayers. Which again, same question that you just asked, what is the impact to taxpayers on local government expenditures as well?
That's another good point. There's the pure ROI discussion, and then there's the cost of not being able to operate, period, based on either plastic considerations or energy considerations or carbon or water basins. I think resiliency is going to be the driving factor, right? In mitigating the risk of what is happening in the world and our obligation to it. So we put those all together. What's ROI? What's your resiliency? What's the risk? And then what's your moral obligation as a company? You're supposed to be improving the lives of people every day.
All right, I'll ask a question. Some ESG parameters may be in conflict with each other. How do you address that? And even in a bigger picture, some of you probably know of the World Economic Forum. The CEO of Unilever made some interesting comments in response to Elon Musk, that if you don't like that Tesla is not rated by a certain agency, well, there's 14 others that you could apply to. So the question in my head is, then which one do you choose? So which rating agency do you choose, and how do you address, once you choose that, the internal conflict of different rating parameters? Julia, I'll go with you.
Well, actually, I was thinking about this Elon Musk situation this week. I was talking to Peter about it earlier, and I personally think that as we went through the slides that I mentioned, there's act to avoid harm, act to benefit stakeholders. And Elon Musk is really good at the E in this equation, but has had many issues, public issues on the S with employee rights, certain, public scandals, et cetera, and on governance, right? They don't have a very independent board. I think there's about 4 board members that are very close to Elon, which can lead to certain challenges with kind of overseeing the company progress. Elon Musk has gone on Twitter and said things, including that he was going to buy Twitter, and then kind of backed out publicly. Had done some things that the SEC has scolded it on. So, is it enough to just be really good at one of the 3? I don't think so, and I think that's more why he's facing the scrutiny in the sustainability index that he was removed from. But to your point, each rating agency has different standards. There is a lot of confusion in the market as to which indicators are being measured for which standards. That is creating kind of a little bit of a backlash on ESG in general. And there is a tremendous amount of effort going into standardizing these metrics in a way that is more consistent. The IMF, the World Bank, all the major banks have committed to doing so. So it's not that nobody's thinking about it or putting money towards it. It's just going to take time. This is like, it has been a long evolution, but we're just at the sort of learning curve right now. You're also getting people who aren't necessarily deeply knowledgeable on ESG to have to report on it, to understand even why they're doing it. So I think there's a learning curve on the asset management side, the rating agency, the corporate side, and eventually as we get better at this, it becomes more transparent. We're able to report towards big goals globally, even like the SDGs, which is another question. How do we even measure that we are going to get to these SDG goals? It's very complicated. It requires thousands of stakeholders reporting in a unified way, which is miles away. But is technology going to help us get there? Is there a lot of effort going into it? Yes. And so I believe that we'll get better at it. It'll be more transparent and more standardized. But I believe personally that we can't just ignore some sets of the metrics for the others, like the S and the G. In the long run, they will come back to bite you, even if it takes time. And well, I own a Tesla, so I can't say that I don't love the car. But I also see some challenges to that model.
Does somebody else want to weigh in on that one?
Anyone?
My comment inside of P&G is I already rattled off 4 or 5 major objectives, but we've applied, a very formal life cycle analysis to each of these vectors and how they are trade-offs and trade spaces. And that's how we're making decisions on project by project, site by site. What is the best approach? So between life cycle analysis and how these different things interact and using tools like systems engineering and model-based systems engineering to allow you to manage that knowledge of those investments and their interactions over their life cycle is critically important, because as you said, you could be counterproductive in this whole activity even when you think you're making progress, whether it be economically, profit and loss, or even just the impact of those systems. So we've really been committed in any of our ESG investments to be doing a full life cycle analysis, training the receiving sites or operations on what their obligation is in those systems, and then managing that knowledge over the life of those investments. So.
Let me ask the two of you, the two Jeffs that manage some big pieces of infrastructure. Much of that is legacy infrastructure, and it was not developed with any type of ESG framework in mind or sustainability. So how do you go from where we are to where we want to go? And is it a systems engineering project?
That's how we're handling. We call those brownfield investments, right? Brownfield versus greenfield. Obviously, we get the most excitement around greenfield. There's always big press. There's their lead sites. But we have probably more brownfield investments, and it is just that, looking at the site and its current, capital assets and how they perform. What do we need to bring to them that either offer net zero or other impacts? And then some of those are being significantly modified to support our water goals or energy goals. So I think it's all of the above. Some we understand they are what they are and either need to be replaced. Others, there's major modifications that we partner with the automation industry and controls industry or intelligence industry to improve. So Again, I think it is a systems engineering objective. I think you bring the different disciplines together over the life cycle, and then you go project by project over a master plan to achieve the site's goals. Because you're not going to sweep in and solve this problem, in 1 year. This is the idea that if we're going to improve the lives through ESG, we're going to have to do it day by day by day in our culture, our people, our technology, and our investments.
Jeff, how does that work with the public infrastructure
Pub-
domain?
For public infrastructure, I mean, just kind of for us, for context, we've got about 1,900 miles of streets that we manage, and over that is about 700 intersections. So there's a lot of legacy technology that needs to be replaced. And the best way that we've approached that and have been, my focus is design standards. And design standards that are specific to RFPs, since obviously we do everything through public procurement, which is very difficult. But the flexibility of those RFPs as technology changes, we can't engineer and write the specification for something we don't even know that we need. And that's been part of my challenge with innovation and emerging tech, is trying to at least, say ask for it, or ask for the outcome and let the vendor come with the solution without trying to specify the solution itself, which nobody knows anything about. In fact, we were a Smart Cities Readiness Council winner for 2021, and through that engagement with the Smart Cities Readiness Council, we went through this procurement challenge of, okay, well, how do we design for innovation for building systems, automation, technology, sensorization, et cetera, across our infrastructure? And we arrived at, well, let's do this with a pilot project with LoRaWAN technology. For those of you that are familiar with LoRaWAN, sensorization radio network technology, small packets of data. And we're like, our engineers and project managers didn't even know what that was, how to spell it, or anything. And I don't care if they don't know how to spell it or ask for it, as long as they're asking for the outcome, is that we need something that is low cost, that's easy to manage and easy to track, batteryless, wireless, all that stuff. Then you bring those solutions to the table and let the vendors figure that out. So I feel like from our perspective for local government is really just to kind of open that up and focus on that outcome and not necessarily focus on this massive undertaking of retrofitting miles and miles of infrastructure all at once, because it's just not going to happen. It's going to happen over time in 5-year increments with our CIP budgets, et cetera.
It's fascinating that the two Jeffs have voiced that. My background includes systems engineering for the US DOT. And a layman's approach to that is define your stakeholder communities, extract all the user needs exhaustively, see which ones have consensus, tabulate them, reduce them to measurable functional requirements, and that's your spec or your project definition. And oh, by the way, overlay a test plan so you don't go off-road in satisfying those consensus-based needs. So that's interesting. I'm hearing that from both of you.
The only difference from there to where we are now is that there's an environment where we can manage that knowledge in an environment like a model-based systems engineering environment, because you want to look at it at a stakeholder level. You let the model that you develop for your investment show the stakeholder. If you want to look at it at the functional level or the actual technology level, you can flip that matrix of information. So, because it's a very big problem or a very big opportunity in a bunch of systems of systems. So I think that's the only difference, Jim, is that we're applying model-based systems engineering to our sustainability investments so that anyone in that equation can see their view of the information, yet it's the same knowledge for that site. Okay.
That's fascinating. Hey, we've only got a few minutes left. So would each of you like to just summarize what we learned today, or some of your parting thoughts?
Yeah, maybe I'll start and we'll go.
Go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, what a privilege to be at ARC. I got a chance to talk on many topics that are maybe more core to my daily job. But my job to partner with our ESG efforts and sustainability efforts at P&G brings me maybe close to a even more important purpose. So I'm inspired that ARC is going to continue to advance this mission and how we support ESG and sustainability in the discussion that we've had this week and beyond. And you have Procter & Gamble's commitment to not only work at it at a company level, but work at it at an automation, controls, intelligence level. And I'm inspired by the people that I get to listen to today, what they're doing with their own companies, with their own mission to make these system of systems available to communities, to industries, to others. So just a great opportunity to have a discussion that needs to continue to expand in ARC and expand in the automation controls, OT, IT world that we typically have come from. It's kind of refreshing to not really have that specific discussion today, yet have it be enabling to what they're all working on. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and I would add, I guess, a couple of observations. One is it's kind of interesting if you look at our business. We've been operating for about 3 years now, and the whole comment about the closed loop of ESG. I think back 3 years ago was enough to say we were electric. We were deploying these electric vehicles and having all this great impact. And then the questions start to rise. Well, what is the source of the power to charge your electric vehicles? And so you've seen this evolution and realization that it's so much more than just kind of declaring that you're now operating, with batteries instead of combustion engines. And so I think that's a great example of the challenges that are being placed on us and other businesses to, think much more broadly about the impact. And then the last item I would add, just kind of taking in some of Julie's comments, is you think about charging. It's not just about having enough stations out there to plug into. In the case of public transit, you don't have the advantage of taking a vehicle off the road for extended periods of time. That's going to cost the public sector entities or the transit organizations many more hundreds of millions of dollars in vehicles that they need to operate an ongoing service. So things like the various forms of charging, to be able to do the immediate charging at bus stops and things of that nature with induction type processes. So it's a continual kind of progress that we're going through here, but I also would tell you that in a few short years we've seen some pretty marked advancements.
Thank you. I guess to add to that, I think the COVID-19 was an exceptional lesson for all of us, that we as a planet can come together and try to solve massive problems that we really didn't expect, and change some companies, change their whole supply chain temporarily to produce certain things that was necessary. Governments collaborated, companies, shared IP that they never did before. So I think that sort of inspired a lot of people in this, I think it's called the Great Resignation, or, to rethink their purpose, not just because, life seemed more fleeting, less secure, less certain, but also because we could see what can be done if we all join forces and try to work towards something bigger. And, to your point, technology is evolving so quickly alongside that we can achieve things that just seemed unsurmountable. So when I come to conferences like this, after COVID, where I was kind of in isolation for a long time, it's inspiring. It gives me hope that we can do this. And, I learned so much about things I don't know about, like nuclear production, other things, but everybody talked about recycling, creating water efficiency. I mean, clearly this topic, not just because it's important to the conference, is important to every business, and we're looking to innovate at scale. So I feel inspired by you guys and by the panel, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Well, one of the things I can honestly say from my experience is disruptive innovation is definitely one of the things that's made me want to evolve in the transportation industry. And it's not just innovation, it's disruptive innovation. We've heard comments about legacy mind thought processes. What happens when you change your master plan, or you're forced to by a black swan event like COVID, to change what your legacy mindset, your infrastructure, your roadway systems, make you rethink how you do things. The late Clayton Christensen, Harvard business professor, always talked about how do you change that disruptive innovation mindset from legacy mindsets, master plans, and do it on a dime. Do it on a quick pivot, and be able to do that with a mindset that you're going to always be able to show progress. Okay? So pivot, don't be married to an idea, always be willing to change. As far as mobility is concerned, I think about things now on a 3D level. Below the earth, surface level, and above. Think about things like the Boring Company. Think about things like smaller form factor vehicles. Okay? Not everything has to be a 4,000-pound vehicle to move your body around. One person in a 5-passenger car is not always going to work. What about personalized eVTOLs? Levitating up to 1,200 feet. You have multiple roadway systems up there. Rethink how we do things to recreate those master plans. And our governance and our people of our communities will vote with their dollars, and they'll vote at the polls.
I'll piggyback that, Glenn, by saying I would get involved in your local government as best as possible. It's amazing to me to see what goes on at the local government level and nobody is at the table. No one comes to our public workshops sometimes, and there's a lot going on, and I know everybody's busy. But these are the decisions, and the elected officials really need to hear from, innovators, not just the squeaky wheel resident that has dog poop on his yard and wants to file a code enforcement violation. I'm being serious. Like, these are the things that we deal with while trying to, address homelessness and transportation crisis and all that stuff. So I think it's really important, for each of you to find whether it's a personal engagement with local government or your company's engagement with local government, because nowadays, to Julia's point, we're all doing things a lot differently than before COVID. And we are willing, and most of us are able to work with public-private partnerships to really help define what those actually mean, since there's not a lot of good examples out there, and there are unicorns here in the state of Florida even. There are unicorns of these true public-private partnerships. But, super important for you all to get involved and, again, just kind of keep that vision going. So super happy to be here. Welcome to Orange County again, and hope you had fun.
Amen.
Well, I'd just like to say personally on behalf of ARC, this has been just a thrilling session today. So I thank you all personally for coming, and let's give them a round of applause.